Welcome back, episode 6 in the BuildASoil 10x10. First off, I really appreciate everyone for jumping in here and putting comments in and asking questions, even interacting on our Instagram, mentioning the YouTube. It's taken hold so much faster than we anticipated. I'm kind of scared for what we've created for ourselves, but we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep creating content, and we're having a really fun time with this. So the interaction is helping motivate us, and I just wanted to take a minute to address that and say thank you. In episode 6, what we're gonna do is really important. It's a highly controversial subject, mainly because people will argue with this, and it's because outdoors they'll do it, but indoors they may not. In the 3x3, we're gonna be setting up a mulch layer. And if you notice on these really healthy plants here, I like this one, I don't know why, number 2 looks pretty good. But you can see we've got cover crop in here. This is just a single white Dutch clover species. We're gonna switch it to a 12 seed when we go into the bed. But we've got more roots in here than just the main plant. And I really like that. We've also got the straw in here, and that straw is helping to insulate the soil. Now, I'm gonna get into the details and talk more as I actually set the bed up, because we're trying to create an ecosystem. There's not just one part when it comes to living soil. You can't just buy a good grow. You have to go through. Now, your first grow, I expect you to have really good results. One of the benefits of using an organic system like this is your terpene levels, your flavors on your first round should be significantly better than its hydro counterpart. However, when you get better at this and you create the full ecosystem, you're gonna avoid most of the challenges. It's gonna be easy to fit into a busy lifestyle, and you're gonna consistently pull not only that quality, but that quantity. And to do that, what we wanna do is set up an ecosystem, and the first step is getting the moisture right, getting actually some roots in here. The way we're gonna do that is to use our 12 seed cover crop. I've got a bag of it that I'm gonna put in here and sprinkle in here today. That is gonna germinate, put enzymes in, put roots into the soil, and we're gonna use a mulch layer to create future compost and create a home for all of our beneficials. I'll explain more as we get into it. Before we begin, I wanna spend a little more time in quadrants 1 and quadrants 4 today, because I'm gonna spend most of the time on camera in sections 2 and 3. Over here, quadrant 1, if you take a peek, we've got a whole bunch of vegetable seeds still going. This wasn't the main intention of this zone. In fact, what we're gonna do here is run 2 earth boxes, and I wanna give you an update. I keep showing you this earth box in the very beginning before we started this series. We had about a foot of cover crop growing in here. So it was about this tall, and we cut it down, and a lot of you are asking, how long is it gonna take to take this big stand of cover crop and turn it into soil? And I said, watch, in less than 2 weeks, it's gonna be soil. And I kinda wanna admit on camera, I wasn't sure if it was gonna happen in 2 weeks. And it's been less than that amount of time. And the amount of soil, or the amount of soil produced in here, the cover crop's almost completely digested. Now, some of the stuff on the surface, that's fine. That'll be mulch for next time, but this was thick. It was nothing like this when we first started. And now you can find worms in here that are still continually breaking this down, but there's mostly castings from them already breaking that cover crop down into material. In this quadrant, we're gonna grow one of these females in this container, and in the future videos, we're gonna show you how we set up a brand new earth box for the production in this quadrant. And then over here, quadrant 4, we've got the vegetables. And so, although we're gonna clear a lot of these out to go to the greenhouse, we're doing some different testing on old seed versus new seed. The main function is just how to eat out of your indoor greenhouse. If you've got a 10x10 and you set it up, you can grow more than enough medicine in a couple areas and grow your own food in another, or you can set up maybe a small tent and match this quadrant. The reason I'm showing you this is I wanna show you how your family can eat out of here 7 days a week. Even if it's not 100% of your food, adding a small amount to each meal gives you really vital, nutritious food that is, it just feels better. It's like you're harvesting it while it's alive. And so I wanna share that with you. An update, the tomato's going crazy. I don't have any more time where we can wait. We've got to trellis this. So there's a style we do in our greenhouse where we actually prune some of this to get it to grow vertically and have more fruit. I've not decided if we're gonna bush it out or grow it vertically, but we're gonna make that decision on camera and set this up for success. It's a small container. Pretty soon I'm gonna have to start feeding it so that we don't lose any fruit here, and also show you how to pollinate. The kale, I mentioned we've been pulling leaves off. You can see new leaves growing in. I'm gonna start pulling all these leaves off so we can get a lot more growth out of it. And it's gonna continue to just stack and stack and stack. And then as it gets bigger, it grows even faster between harvests, so you can continue to eat out of here. And then once we get the vegetables out, we're gonna start growing some sprouts on here and using these trays, this shelf here, to grow some food. And I'm excited to share that as well, because a lot of people, once they get into growing their own medicine, they realize their new power and they're like, well, I want to grow food and anything else that I can. And if you follow us, we actually do a lot of sourdough bread baking because it teaches us about the biology of the soil. And I encourage you to go down all the same paths. It's really, really rewarding. Let's go get the worms. Let's go in the worm bin here while we got you on camera. Open it up. You can see we just feed some of the vegetables that are here. You can see some of the worms on top. Now, I've not kept this as active because it's just, you know, secondary. We process our waste. But if you keep this active, you could just pull handfuls of worms out of here. So I went and grabbed just a few worms from the worm bin just to show you, at least on camera. A couple of red worms like this, if you add maybe 10, 20 of them and throw them in the soil, they're gonna compost and they're gonna take any of the amendments down that you put on the surface in the future and bring it down into the soil. So on our vegetable farm, we throw a whole bunch of worms. In fact, we just inoculated, took a lot of the worms, we ordered some in, and spread them across the farm. And they help us grow the produce, and it also helps with cannabis. So I'm just gonna throw these in there, and they're just gonna kind of work their way in. And I normally would put probably a handful for a bed this large. You don't have to order in pounds of worms because it turns it into a worm bin so fast. I prefer to start a worm bin, pull a few worms from it, and these worms will develop their own ecosystem in here, and it'll happen pretty quickly. With the warmth and the lights and the plants growing, it's a perfect home for them, and they'll start to take off in no time. So don't forget the worms. And also from the worm bin, a lot of times you're gonna get predator mites, rove beetles that come for free. If you don't have your own worm bin, you can check out Colorado Worm Company castings. We carry them and they're harvested fresh the day that they're ordered and sent out only once a week. And that should enable you to get some worm cocoons and some babies as well. Next, we're gonna grab the watering can and we're gonna irrigate this. So now I'm gonna add all the moisture here. Before I do that, I like to add a few of my favorite products. And so I'm gonna add a lot of the moisture first before I add the cover crop because it needs about a whole can of water. I'm gonna save just a little at the end and I'm gonna use that to put on the cover crop at the very end. So right now I'm about to add the 12 seed cover crop, and to this I added some root wise. So far nothing's been added to the take and bake soil that we made, and so this will be the first addition of anything that I add. The first time it was just water and the saponin extract. So now I've got the root wise. If you watch previous videos, I actually sprinkled a tablespoon of root wise into this bag of 12 seed clover crop and I shook it up. It's a great way on large acreage. That's a great way to get inoculation because the microbes are gonna get in contact with the freshly germinated roots and they'll feed each other and they'll inoculate the soil. Alternatively, you can just add it to your water. And since I've already put some in here, I'm actually gonna add some to the water to get this all inoculated and ramped up with life. And so I'm gonna put 1 tablespoon here, normally in a 5-gallon bucket of water. I'm gonna put a tablespoon in my 3.5-gallon Chapin sprayer and just do a 1 good first application to get it ramped up with life. Once I'm done watering, I'm gonna put the cover crop in and then the mulch layer, and I'll show you as I go. Really good product, it's our favorite. I'm gonna add a tablespoon, you can see. There we go, doesn't have to be exact. I'm gonna go ahead and put that into the water. You can put this in a bucket and stir it. I'm putting it directly into my can and I'm just gonna shake the can, make sure that it all gets mixed in there. Another thing that I do to help it mix is I add our wetting agent. We're actually coming up with a name for this right now. You guys voted online and really liked the What's Zappinin' name. But Jay Plant Speaker was actually looking at this at the same time. We've been talking behind the scenes how much we like it, so who knows, maybe his name will be involved, we'll see. Either way, we just want you to use a wetting agent. I really like it. So I'm gonna sprinkle some in here. I can probably measure it out, but this is such a small amount. For 3.5 gallons, this is an extract. It goes really far. So I'm gonna add just a sprinkle in here, not even to the, here's 1 teaspoon. I'm not even gonna get to a teaspoon. It's like a 1/4 teaspoon is all I'm using. You can see the texture, it's like little beads. It goes in a solution super easy and it adds a soapiness to the water. It also helps everything mix in the water really well. That's it, root wise and the saponin. Now I'm gonna shake it. Now that it's shaken, I'm gonna pump the sprayer. Couple ways to do this. You could just use a watering can or a hose. When I'm doing this, the first time at least, I'm gonna use the 1 gallon per minute nozzle. When you have one of these sprayers, they indicate on the side. I'm just using the biggest one. It makes spraying a little bit faster. When I foliar spray, I'll use the smaller nozzle. This makes it really nice because we're evenly applying moisture. That's why I like watering slowly the first time. I can use this big fan wave to do it even across the whole bed. And I'm just gonna sit here for 2 or 3 minutes and empty the entire can. Reason being, if you watched our previous video, We made about 70 gallons of soil, and I like to water about 5% at a time. And this wasn't very wet after we moved it and put it in here and scooped it out, so 5% will be fine. It's not gonna be too much. 5% of 70 is 3.5 gallons of water. That happens to be the size of my sprayer, so it's gonna make it really easy to just unload all this. Now I do wanna mention while I'm spraying, I'm going to do the same thing to these 10 gallons over here in quadrant 2. Even though they're just 10-gallon containers, I'm gonna be adding moisture, just like I'm doing now, 5%, and then I'm gonna sprinkle the cover crop, put the mulch on. Just because you have a smaller ecosystem doesn't mean that you can't do the whole thing. Same in our 1 gallons. These really healthy plants, they have cover crop, they have the mulch, and the mulch that I'm using is an organic straw that's been pre-pasteurized, and then they grew mushrooms on, so it's full of mycelium. You don't have to use pasteurized straw, but it helps eliminate any potential bug or pathogen. We offer regular straw mulch. People have used it for years, but you'll get seeds germinating in it, and so this is our preferred method. Keep it going here. Remember to pump while I'm talking. Now this can be a little deceiving. I talked about it in the first video when we make the soil. It looks like I'm putting a ton of water on here, but if I show you on camera right now, even though I've sprayed probably a gallon, if I just move it, it's dry right there. I mean, a centimeter under it's dry. Part of that is because I'm using the wetting agent. Part of it because the sprayer doesn't go that fast. But it's really dispersing the moisture instead of running straight through. I don't want to just put a gallon on and watch it pour out into my tray. I want it to absorb into the soil completely. And that's why I'm going to put this whole can in here until it's nice and moist.
Give me a second, give me a second.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, so I just finished applying. I didn't put every drop of water. I saved a little bit so that I can put the cover crop down. And a couple things I want to mention when you do cover crop. So on a farm, you'll realize right away, if you just spread expensive cover crop seed across the barren soil, you're not going to get the germination that you're looking for. So we're going to cover it with our mulch layer. That'll help protect it, and that'll get a good germination. Another thing I've learned on large scale is mulch can be expensive to bring in when you need acres worth. And so oftentimes we'll either grow our own mulch on site, or we'll at least make sure to rake it in. And so when I put the cover crop in here, I'm not gonna just sprinkle it, but I'm gonna use my fingers and scrape just a little. I'll show you when I do that. That's gonna make sure all the seed comes into contact with the soil. What I'm not gonna do is bury it deep. A lot of the seed's very small. It doesn't need to be planted deep. It can be on the surface. So I'm gonna put it on the surface, rake it in with my fingers, cover it with the straw, wet it down one more time. That last bit of moisture is gonna glue the seed, the straw, and the soil together, keeping it all moist. I'm probably still gonna walk in here and just moisten the top a little bit until we get germination, which if you were doing this at home, you'd do the same thing. You'd irrigate until your cover crop popped, and then you let it ride out and do its thing. So let's get started. I've got the cover crop. You certainly could measure this out, but I want to remind you that any of the cover crop that just germinates and dies is gonna be like a seed meal fertilizer. And so I'm not too worried about overdoing it unless budget is a concern. If budget is a concern, clover only takes like 5 to 15 pounds per acre. It goes a long way. So in here, we really overdo it because we want to add nutrition as well as get the soil covered. So I'm gonna sprinkle the cover crop, and I'm just gonna use the bag because it makes it really easy. And I'm gonna try and do it as even as I can so there's not huge pockets. I'm going around the perimeter, and then I'm gonna go back to the center. You can see the root wise is kind of falling out too because I shook all this up. That's it. I've got way more than enough cover crop in there than I need. That's gonna help add a little bit of fertility. And now what I'm gonna start doing is covering that with a straw. And this is creating that ecosystem. The straw is actually gonna help provide a home. And the home's gonna be for the predator mites that we want in here because they eat the fungus gnat larvae. And they help break down all of the organic material we're gonna continually add because we don't throw this soil away. If you notice in here is pumice. This is not perlite. It looks a little different, and it's real soil. This is a rock. It's not an obsidian rock puffed up like popcorn. The reason why other industries use perlite, it's super lightweight, holds air, but it's easy to ship. It's cost effective. The thing is, if you keep your soil like we want you to instead of throwing it away, the perlite floats to the top and it breaks down and it doesn't create a permanent solution. We don't want you to throw your soil away. We want you to keep it forever. Look at this mulch, full of fungus. I love seeing that. It smells good. It's nice and moist. I'm gonna put it all in here, and then what I'm gonna do is use this as like my bin. I'm gonna take some of this out and cover the 10 gallons. What I wanna mention while I'm doing this is that you do not want to over mulch when you're doing cover crop seed. If I didn't do the cover crop, you could literally mulch it to the top here. Eventually though, you don't want to suffocate your plants. And so the main thing, my goal is to provide enough cover in here where it doesn't completely suffocate the cover crop. It allows the cover crop to go through. And then later on, when we chop the cover crop down, those young green plants are gonna fall in this brown carbon-rich material and create a carbon to nitrogen ratio that's gonna make compost right on top of our soil. And that's part of the ecosystem that we're after, because as we grow plants, they're gonna take nutrients. But as long as we're continually adding back through slow release in the mulch layer, we're always gonna have new available nutrients coming into the system. That's part of the balance. If you imagine a 100% perfect balanced soil, the second your plant takes from it, it's no longer balanced. So the only way to have a balanced soil is to constantly have something that's adding to the system at the same rate that you're taking from it. Now, I don't want you to do like rocket science and all this math, so all we have to do is create a mulch layer and worms and this natural system, and nature will do the rest. They've figured this all out. We don't have to be perfect, and I'm constantly reminded of that when I read Masanobu Fukuoka's One Straw Revolution. And this really brings it home. If you read that book, it changes the whole game for how you think. Even when we do soil testing and I wanna get all sciencey, I remind myself about that book. He was a scientist and he learned a lot about the natural processes, and he went to a mulch system like this and a very basic system, very much similar to the BuildASoil way, but we're bringing it indoors. Now this is way too much straw for in here, and I wanna remind you of that, but I'm gonna take some of it for the 10 gallons. So I'm just breaking it up and getting it all nice in here so it's easy for me to transfer. I wanna show you in a pocket what I'm gonna look to do here. So over here, I'm gonna just put this in above. This is about the thickness that I want. Right here, see how I can still kind of see some soil, but it's completely covered? That's what I'm looking for. I don't want to put that much in here because the cover crop's never gonna grow through it. So as I go through, think of that. You're just trying to let the cover crop go through. We get a lot of people asking us about the mulch. We do sell this. And it's really nice because this is certified organic straw that's grown on the organic mushroom farm. They grow mushrooms in this. And when they're done, it's a waste product that we like to recycle, so it's pretty cost effective. And you can buy it online, and then you'll have this exact same experience that we're going through. If not, you can find some stuff locally for mulch, bark, straw, whatever it is. Just avoid weed-free straw or mulch. Typically that means it's been sprayed with Roundups. There's no weeds. Roundup's not good. We don't want to use any of it at all. Couple of seeds popping up, it's not a problem. Look at that, mushrooms growing in here. I love these, it's pretty cool. Some people buy them, keep them, and they grow mushrooms on them, then they use them. So, all right, that's looking pretty good. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted to take some of this out so it's not too thick. So before I water, I'm gonna do some of that, and I'm actually gonna spend some time watering these 10 gallons in, putting the cover crop in, and I'm just gonna get after it right now. All right, so while I'm watering, I'm just gonna go through and pull up some of these questions that we've been getting and see if I can't answer them, because this is gonna take a little while. All right, this is from Mr. Huey. It says, does the pH of the water matter with living soil? Well, that's good. I'm adding water right now. It's a good question. I have well water and it's high in pH, thanks. This is the best way the question could be asked, because most people I've found, they're asking about pH from water like we're using in here. It's from a tap. Typically, the tap water is gonna be of a neutral pH, mainly because your city has a vested interest in not ruining all their infrastructure in the pipes. If you get it too caustic, too alkaline, it can cause issues. So usually out of the tap, it's fine. The concern with tap water is that it's got chlorine or chloramine in it. And what I found with living soil is it just rips the chlorine and chloramine apart, and it's typically not an issue in these bigger beds. We kind of filter it through this mulch layer that we're creating with the kashi and all the probiotics. However, I do recommend filtering it to get that out. Let's say you're starting with neutral filtered water. pH is not necessary. We don't do any of that in living soil. We have the pH of the soil. That's important. We did a lot of work for you already in this recipe that we made, as well as all 4 of these recipes. We send these to the lab and we identify the pH. The reason why, the way that we do that is more important though. It's the actual balance of calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, all these things in relationship to each other. If we just pH the water and we pour it on there, it's not gonna take all the calcium out unless we're just pouring a dozen gallons through a really small container. So when you're growing in living soil and you have minerals in the soil, it's not hydroponics, it's not soilless. The pH of the soil is what matters. Now here's the question though, the second part, you mentioned well water. If you're using well water, that could be adding some sodium, some bicarbonates, some chlorides that we do not want in our soil. And because in living soil, we don't get a lot of runoff. We're not flushing this container ever. We almost never have water coming out the bottom. We're just trying to water just right. What that can lead to is buildup. If you're using well water and you're not filtering it first, then it's going to lead to sodium buildup, which is going to dramatically lower your yield. Now, not all well water has sodium. It could be some other problem. Or it could be that it has some great calcium. We just need to know that. I'd recommend getting your water tested, and then we can decide, do we need to add some gypsum? Do we need to actually add an acid to neutralize the bicarbonate, thus pHing the water down? Those answers are different. So alkalinity and the dirtiness to the water can cause alkaline water that we do not want. But just a higher pH water may not be a problem if it's clean water. So I hope that is a better way to answer the question. The rule of thumb for the home grower, if you're using filtered water from the tap, you're fine. I don't prefer RO, but a filter that gets rid of the chlorine and most of the contaminants means you're good to go. You never have to pH and you're fine. If you do have a well, let's get it tested. We may have to pH it, or we may want to find a different water source. Let's look for another question. I'm going to try and remember to water while I do this, but who cares? I think the questions are the most important part. Can I completely, so this is Timothy Smith, says, can I completely dry out my used soil, then add craft blend and castings before planting? Will that be too hot if I just mix that up and pot? Thank you for reading questions in advance. Love this video. All right, so basically what he's saying, can I dry out my used soil? Sure, not really a problem to dry it out. Of course, it's going to kill some of the microbes, but they're actually going to go in a dormant phase and they'll be ready to reactivate once you add moisture. And you can always re-inoculate with Rootwise, Kashi blend, and things like that. So that's totally fine. Then add craft blend and castings before planting. Will that be too hot? It's not going to be too hot, especially if you follow the normal amounts. Craft blend is a very good all-purpose. It's got like, I think 15 of our different ingredients in there. So when you add it, it's not going to be too hot as long as you follow recommendations. The Cocoa is loaded in nutrients. So here's what I'll say. If your soil is already loaded and you know that, and then you let it dry out and you add copious amounts of craft blend and Cocoa, it's possible we might be a little bit excessive in certain areas. So if you've already used your soil and you're letting it dry out because you're busy, and then you want to come back and add some Cocoa and craft blend, more power to you. That it's going to crush. It'll absolutely work. The Cocoa is full of life. It basically re-inoculates your soil. It'll come with predators and beneficials that'll help break down the craft blend, and it'll add tons of fertility to your soil. I wish I could use Cocoa in our recipes, but it's so full of nutrients and it's so small batch made, we would just blow through it in a day. So good question. You absolutely can do that. As always, keep balance. Make sure you're not overdoing it. You can always add more later. I mentioned Cocoa a couple of times, so if you don't know what that is, that's the Colorado Worm Company worm castings. Vermicompost is another term that we use because that's the real word. Worm castings is kind of made up. We sell an essential oil product. You'll hear people call it therapeutic grade. That's an imaginary word. People just come up with these terms because they have to market against each other. But the Cocoa is local down the street. Makes some of the best castings I've ever used. Let's get another question while I'm finishing up this watering here. Any tips for the best indoor vegetables for cannabis companion planting? And this is from Daryl Thomas III. Really good question. In this quadrant over here in quadrant 4, we're actually going to be highlighting some of the companion planting. I'll be putting some radishes and some other things. I've got some holy basil I'll be planting. But for inside your container, you want stuff that's going to grow faster and without as much light. So there's no right answer here. Growing, for instance, a tomato plant may not be as advantageous because it takes 60, 90 days to grow. But lettuce, if I were to put it in here right now around the edges, by the time my transplant gets big, I could already be eating some lettuce. I think it's easier to do lettuce separate. So in containers like this, a lot of times I'll do like radishes, or I'll add in a couple of herbs that I like to eat, and you can just pick from different spots. I've noticed though, it becomes secondary. I'm so worried about the cannabis. I give it everything it needs. I tend to do better having a container like this quadrant where we actually have vegetables where that's their primary function, and I keep that in my grow room. If you're limited on space, experiment. It's the best way that I can say. And keep in mind, the faster growing like radishes, they're gonna come to fruition before your main cannabis canopy blocks all the light out from it actually performing. Yeah, and if you happen to have already done this and you're growing some companion plants, chime in here. Let us know what you're doing, what's been working for you. It might help us answer this question and give us some new ideas. All right, well, I think I'm pretty much done with adding the moisture here, and we've answered a lot of the questions that I wanted to get answered. I wish I could just sit here and answer every single question, but We will be answering them in the comments down below. And if you keep asking and we do a lot more of these videos, eventually we're gonna hit a lot of the common questions. In here, all I'm doing is getting that 5% of moisture in here, just like we did in the other bed. And then I'm gonna take some of the mulch out of the bed and I'm gonna put it inside these containers with the cover crop, exactly the same as I did that 3x3. And these particular beds, I didn't flatten out with my hands first. They're actually a little bit, they're not flat on top because I dug in here to do soil samples for our Q1 soil tests. And you can see all of these soil tests available at BuildASoil.com under the given recipe. If you just look in the photos, I have a copy of the saturated paste test report for every one of these recipes right in the photo section. Not only do we have these soil tests available right now, but we're gonna be doing that every quarter. So 4 times a year, we're gonna publish these soil test results. So if you like to geek out like that, you can see our history of results. You can also test your own soil and we can help. And in addition, we're gonna do in the 3x3 over here, this take and bake, we're gonna take that soil test as well. So you can show you all the results for what we're growing in. And I think it'll help paint a better picture for you as we start to get this whole process underway. Now, if you don't like soil testing, it doesn't matter. We've done all the hard work for you. We're really passionate about this and you can just plug and play and it'll work really well. So this is the LOS Malibu, made with Malibu compost. Same recipe here, but with Ole Mountain, so that's called the LOS Ole. That's a different compost. Here we have our light recipe. That's one of our most balanced, most popular. And over here is the 3.0. This is our newest, most popular water-only type soil. And the reason why I'm doing all 4 recipes here is sometimes we get questions about which recipe is gonna work best. I think they all work really well. The light and the 3.0 are the most different, but we're gonna show you the differences as we grow the entire time. And I think that doing it in smaller containers, it's gonna give you a great idea about which recipe is best for you. So I've got the last of my cover crop seed, the 12 seed clover crop. It's already got a little bit of root wise in here. Doing the same thing as I did to the 3x3. I'm just gonna sprinkle a little bit in each container. Oh, that ollie is so dark, it's beautiful. You can see the seeds. There's only a little left. I'm just gonna get it all even in each container. Okay, that's it. We've got cover crop in there. And now I'm gonna cover that. And like I mentioned, I don't wanna cover it too thick. So I'm gonna take some of this out of here, which was a little bit too thick. I want this cover crop to go through it. And I'm gonna take some out. It's got a nice moisture to it. Bring it over to each one of these and just sort of cover them up with a similar amount so the cover crop can go through. And as I mentioned before, this is gonna keep the moisture in that top layer of soil, keeping the biological activity all the way through to the top and helping germinate the cover crop. I could certainly fill up this bed full. I can fill up these 10 gallons full. But in the 10 gallons in particular, I'm gonna be coming back and top dressing a little bit so that we get really good yield out of a smaller container. And I can always just do it right through this mulch layer, so it's not a huge concern. And as we keep going, this straw is gonna turn into soil with the green cover crop, and we're just gonna build on it again and again and again as we go. Okay, again, we're just not overdoing it, but it's completely covered. As long as there's a little light getting through there, the cover crop, it's gonna find a way. I'm sure everyone's seen some plants growing through like concrete in a parking lot. This cover crop will almost always find a way, but it's gotta get germinated. I mentioned raking it through. I just sprinkled this in. It's not imperative, but I did mention it, so I'll do it on this one. I do like to just make a little contact with my finger in the soil here, making sure all the cover crop gets loosely incorporated. With this straw done the way I'm doing it, it's not 100% necessary, but I just wanna give you all the little tips. If you incorporate it just barely into that top layer, you're gonna get faster and more uniform germination. And it's really pretty when you have the whole container fully enveloped in cover crop instead of just, 1/4 of it. See how I can actually see a little bit of soil through here? And there's like holes here. This is why I like using straw. In the One Straw Revolution, he joked how throwing the straw down is the right way. When he taught the locals, they would go put it in perfect lines like this, straight, and that would suffocate the soil. And he says, why are you doing it perfect? Just throw it down there. So this is what we're looking for. Other people will use rice holes. I feel like it suffocates it. I like the straw. It's my favorite way to go. Last part, now that I've put everything in, since I was digging out of here, I'm gonna make sure that this is even and consider that optimal thickness so I don't overdo it. That's all I'm doing, is making sure nothing's too thickly matted together where the cover crop can't really grow through. While the cover crop's growing, I can move this a little bit if I notice a pocket, but I just wanna make sure it's not overdone, because as soon as I add moisture, a lot of the air that's in here is just gonna kind of get taken out. So I'll take this, I don't need it all. No reason to overdo it, less is more. And you can see this one bale, I mean, it's gone so far. I used this earlier. I did already tomatoes and peppers, and take a little bit more out. Okay, that looks great. The last step is to marry this all together with a little bit more moisture. We're gonna glue the cover crop in and keep the straw wet. And all I have to do is put the last bit of moisture that I've kept here in the can on top of this. And then each day going forward, I'm gonna come in and make sure it's not drying out on top until this cover crop starts to germinate. Only take a few days. And the good news is these are already sexed. I haven't gone through and separated them yet because I want to show you on camera. But even at this height, under 18 hours of light, they're showing their pre-flowers. They're showing me whether they're male or female. That's going to allow me to teach you in the coming videos. Then we're going to take females and put them into each one of these beds and show you how we do that. Next up, besides just planting in here and here, we've got to build another earth box. So in these next couple of videos, I'm going to be building an entire earth box, sexing the plants, transplanting into every quadrant, moving all the vegetables out into the greenhouse. So we've got so much to cover. If I go a little too fast and miss something, there's something you want to know about, please write a question, send it in. We'll be sure to address it on video or answer it in the questions. And thanks for watching this whole time. Just want them all to be lightly moistened here. Get that straw, there's no dry pockets or anything. That's it. Use the last of my moisture. So before we wrap up, I want to point a few things out. On the Instagram, I did a photo where we showed 11 days before this, little tiny transplants going into these 1 gallons. And now, 11 days later, you've just got raging health. Now, I want to address something. I haven't adjusted the shape of this whatsoever. A lot of growers will top them by cutting the top off, or they'll do some training. I want to discuss that in the coming videos. When I'm looking for keeper seeds, I like to let them totally naturally show me their shape. And that's what they're doing right now. And this is one of my favorite ones, it's beautiful. This one is the halitosis #1. That was the #2. And then over here, we've got the Branson's Royal Revenge, which is a Long Valley cross, a story to an employee that works here named Branson. This is his revenge, and he's making a comeback. He's about to start working here again, and that'll weave into the story as we go forward. God, these are great. Some interesting different leaf shapes in here. Like this one's a lot fatter. And then look at over here. This one I wanted to point out. This has been a triple since day one. You can see three. All the way through it's got triple, where all the other ones are double every time. So sometimes you see some unique things when you run them from seed, and it's fun to see what you get. That's part of the process, part of enjoying the entire experience. Well, thanks for watching. This has been episode 6. Appreciate you watching as I did all this mulch layer. Going forward, we've got a lot of content to cover. So if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button, tell your friends about it. The amount of feedback that we've gotten so far is getting us super excited. So I promise to keep doing all this documentation, answering all the questions, as long as you do your part, and make sure you give us thumbs up, subscribe. Those numbers, when we see them, we all get excited around here, and it makes us want to do the next video even more. Again, if you've got questions, let us know.